What's up, fam? It's Brian Castrillo, and I just watched Tales of the Walking Dead episode 3, and this is now my favorite one of the entire series. I love the other two, but this one is fantastic. It's so good to see Samantha Morton back as Alpha again. But I got questions, and there's two questions that I'm going to ask in the end of this, and we're going to try and figure this out together, and I'm going to need your help. But what's really cool about this episode is it's narrated by Alpha. And at first I'm thinking, is she talking to us? Did she just break the fourth wall? Is she Deadpool and She-Hulk? And I'm like, what is going on? Now we do find out later on in the episode what happens, and that's where I'm gonna need your help with. But let's start this, shall we? So we start off with Brooke, and Brooke is kind of the leader of the society on this barge ship where they're basically playing dress up. They're still it's kind of weird to me because they're having this kind of ritzy party ball, and they live on the ship in the middle of the bayou swamp where there's alligators and everything and walkers all around. But I don't know, maybe it kind of helps keep civility and kind of remember the old times. But whatever, I just thought it was kind of strange. But then there's this whole party's going on. We see Lydia, she's hanging out with Brooke in the inn, and Dee kind of walks up to where the bar is, and there's this older gentleman, and he's clearly drunk, or he's really tipsy or whatever. And after a brief conversation with Dee, she's not quite Alpha yet, he walks off, or I should say stumbles off, and he's basically going back to his room. And then Dee starts talking to this bartender named Billy, who is a complete asshole. I mean, we got a bartender in the middle of the apocalypse. If that isn't strange, I don't know what is. But I digress. And he's being an asshole to her, and he's like, why are you even here? Why are you with us? You're a drunk, or kind of implying that. And she's like, I'm doing this for my daughter. And he's like, well, if you're doing this for your daughter, why is she over there by herself? Really berating her. And then you see the look that kind of Dee gives, and this is very Alpha-esque. I'm like, this guy just messed up. But we do learn about him in a little bit. And as we go through this, we learn that Lydia, who's played by Scarlett Blum, who did a fantastic job, and Lauren Glazer plays Brooke, by the way, who also did a fantastic job, but Lydia is fearful of her mother. And at this moment we start seeing Alpha, and I'm like, is this a flashback? But she is narrating, and one of the things she says is that she killed Lydia's father when she was only 9. So Lydia is only 9 here. She's very young, and that's why we have Scarlett Blum playing her instead of the normal actress. And she goes off, and she comes out of the ship I believe it's the aft inn, and looking off into the woods. And this is a really cool scene, would make a great poster, but we see it's very foggy. Walkers are walking off in the distance. I'm immediately thinking of the Whispers. And I'm already going to, what is the timeline of this? Because I was thinking maybe this is the start of the apocalypse, but clearly it is not. Because the fact that walkers are just randomly walking out there, and everybody is aware of the walkers that are out there. And there was this close scene where they're arguing also, where it looks like Fish kind of fell over, but there was a walker in there, and thought this was an accident, but it ends up not being later, as you find out. But Dee goes to, because Brooke is arguing with her, basically telling her that Lydia is fearful of her mother. And I thought she was going to stab her, but she ends up stabbing the walker that's stuck in the net. And then you hear Billy up above. This is a little later scene, but and then you have a scene. This scene, I think, is one of the more important ones, where Lydia is talking to her daughter Dee is talking to her daughter Lydia. I'm tired. It's late, and we see Lydia saying how she loves, fairies. And I thought this was kind of a kid thing, boys might like Dungeons and Dragons or Transformers or whatever. But then Dee immediately looks to her and says, do you believe in fairies? No, don't do that. We need to survive. I am the one who can keep you alive. And then she, of course, brings up her father, and which this was kind of sad. And she says how, well, he believes that people can help keep us alive. And then she reminds her that people are the problem and people turn on each other. So that was kind of a telling scene, and it becomes relevant later on in the episode. Then we learn later that that old guy that was drunk, he's missing, and no one knows where he is. And they're assuming that, that he fell over. That's kind of what we're led to believe at this moment. But Dee lets everybody know that, Billy, should know he was the one who was giving him all these drinks, and this is where suspicion's starting, and Brooke's getting on Billy. So clearly Dee has her sights set on him. Then we have another scene. This is kind of interesting, where Brooke, someone comes up to Brooke, and this is right before, that we found out he was missing, but they got this whole Tae-Bo setup thing, which this actually makes sense. Keep your people fit. And that's where this next, up and coming scene is going to take place. But before that, there's a moment where Dee catches Billy taking a mirror and kind of flashing a light into the woods, kind of signaling. She yells to the people up above on the top of the ship to get Brooke, and eventually she comes, and then she starts berating Billy. But then he catches her with a knife in her. He sees a knife in her pocket, and he ends up jumping off, and this is where Brooke starts turning on Dee at this moment, and she's like, we just lost another one. And keep in mind how crazy this is when he jumps over into the water. We got alligators, we got walkers in the water. So that was clearly a kind of a nutty thing. But you can definitely see where Dee is beginning to turn into alpha. She is not all there, but she still has that motherly instinct where she will do anything for her daughter. But she does not clearly have all of her sanity in there. And we learn later that Lydia is not really kind of all there as well. At least, later, obviously in The Walking Dead, she's a lot better. But at this point, at 9, she's clearly has seen a lot of stuff. But so now back to that Tae-Bo scene that I told you about. We hear, Dee is looking for Lydia, who seems to be missing, in her room, and then Brooke catches up with her and basically says that she needs her space, and Dee basically threatens her and says, I'll basically kill you if you don't tell me where my daughter is. And then we hear a commotion. They go up. Brooke sees one of her men one of her people are dead, kind of laying on the boat, and they go where to that Tae-Bo scene was, and we see Billy, and he's brought some other men in. And what we learn is that he basically is aware of this number that Brooke, this magic number where only certain people can come in, and he's been basically killing people to let his people on board, because he wants to take over this boat. And he came, of course, Billy came a couple weeks ago, and he's got everybody on their knees, kind of like the Saviors did. Definitely got some Savior vibes right there. And we see him start shooting people, and then all of a sudden Brooke comes in. She's got a big bruise or a gash on her cheek, and he goes to her. He's like, well, what are you doing? He's angry at this guy he tells him not to hurt her, but then he's like, you can still be the boss, but not really. You can kind of be in charge of that pep energy or whatever, kind of basically mocking her. Then we see Dee come up behind the guy, kill the guy that's holding Brooke, saves her, shoots a couple of his guys, but of course prior to this he had shot a couple of the people on their knees. And what's kind of interesting that is you kind of see the human element, or where basically people are turning on each other to save each other, and they're not working together. And that's kind of what he was doing. He was playing on the fear, and that's basically why it ended up people getting killed. But we see Dee jump overboard into the raft, which is where Lydia was, and they take off. And then of course all this chaos is happening within the ship. They get to shore, and and Dee has to start killing these walkers, and eventually this one kind of bigger walker gets a hold of Dee, and it looks like he's gonna bite her, but she ends up, killing it, but it falls on top of her. And Liddy's on the outside of this, and we see one of the guys who escaped. He's, trying to crawl to her for help, but then a walker, walks onto him and starts eating him. And, Dee eventually coaxes Liddy to come under this walker with her. And this is kind of interesting, back into the timeline thing, because she is we realize that she is aware of putting blood on you, because she's wiping on her, on Lydia, to basically mask them from the walkers. Of course, we learned this in day 1 of The Walking Dead, but episode 1, but that was pretty much the beginning of the apocalypse, where we're learning this stuff. So that's why I'm wondering, where is his timeline? But Dee is a very smart woman, and Samantha Morton is absolutely fantastic in that role. One of the best villains of the entire Walking Dead universe, clearly, hands down. But then they eventually, they get out, and they do see Dee sees Brooke, and as she's kind of helping her daughter Lydia, she ends up putting these earmuffs on her, and then says, just stay here. She gets up, and she's about ready to kill Brooke, but Lydia stops her. She ends up turning around and sees her, and then, she eventually brings her back, and she tells her, you don't understand what she's done. She has hurt you in more ways you don't really understand. She ends up getting her to stop and puts the earmuffs back on her, but we see Lydia kind of in the fetal position. She's scared and she's petrified, but she puts the earmuffs back on her, and Dee goes back and cuts her face, Brooke's face, like she's the Joker now, and she says, this is the mark this is the mark of me, and that, so you'll always know. But why is that important? She leaves her there. So the first question is, are we going to see Brooke again? Do you think that Lydia in The Walking Dead might run into a woman, or Brooke basically, where she's gonna not at first recognize her, but that gash on her face, although I don't know if Lydia's seen that, but she is definitely going to recognize Lydia, and they'll recognize each other. But is Brooke still out there? Are we going to see Brooke again? Does Lauren Glazer show up in the Walking Dead universe again? Like maybe she's part of the CRM. We find out later. Who knows? But that would be cool if she comes back. Now, after that, Lydia takes off. Dee's looking for her. And this is where we find out that, because Dee eventually finds her, but where Lydia is very troubled, because she says that, the trees are talking to her and the fairies are talking to her. So now it's not a question, does she like it, but she actually believes in this. So her mind is not, she's not really stable, and she definitely needs help. And her mom is not the right person for her. But then, Dee is getting ready to kill both of them. But then Dee, hears it, and then Lydia's like, see, the trees are talking to me. But we see walkers coming up, and I'm like, oh, they're in trouble now. But it's the Whispers. And one of the Whispers, the head Whisperer, takes off, her mask, and she has blonde hair. Keep in mind, Alpha is narrating this whole thing, and then we see, that Whisper ends up knocking her out, but it kind of fast forwards, and we see Alpha, walking up to the head, and it's got that blonde, remember the blonde wig? So, but where I'm confused is, go back to that episode where she met Beta. Beta was the one who was wearing the skin. This is where I thought Alpha learned that from Beta, but this is saying that she had already met the Whisperers. What is the timeline? What is going on here? I'm really confused, but what do you guys think? Where does this go? But yeah, absolutely love the episode. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about Brooke? Do we see her again? What are your thoughts on this whole Whisperer timeline? And as always, thank you guys for watching. I love you guys, but I'm always going to give a shout out. This one goes out to my good friend AJ. I'm going to put his YouTube link and Instagram in the comments. Please check him out. His YouTube page is fantastic. He does a lot of skits, Great fan of the Walking Dead universe. You're going to absolutely love him. Make sure you hit that subscribe for him. And as always, again, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next episode. Love you guys. TW Family.